What would you do if your dying friend begged you to marry the scarred woman waiting for him in a distant town? Would you walk away or keep the promise and discover that the greatest storms of the West are not outside in the snow but inside? The human heart. The wind was a living thing that winter, a beast made of ice and fury that clawed at the seams of our canvas tent. It howled across the Wyoming plains, burying the world in a shroud of white. Inside, the lantern flame trembled, casting long dancing shadows that made the small space feel like the belly of a groaning ship lost at sea. The cold was a physical presence, seeping through my heavy sheepskin coat and sinking deep into my bones. But the chill I felt had little to do with the storm. It came from the man lying on the bedroll in front of me, his breath, a ragged, shallow whisper in the frozen air. Silas Blackwood, the man who had been more of a brother to me than my own blood, was dying. I knelt beside him, the rough wool of my trousers scraping against the frozen ground. His face, usually tanned and weathered from years on the trail, was now pale and slick, with a feverish sweat that even the frigid air couldn't cool. His eyes, clouded with pain, struggled to focus on me. "Jed," he rasped, his voice as thin as a thread. Snow gusted under the tent flap and he flinched. "Jedediah, you listen to me." "I'm here, Silas," I said, my voice thick. I took a tin cup of water, warming it slightly with my hands before touching it to his cracked lips. He managed only a few drops. "When you get to Frost River, she'll be there," he breathed, each word an effort. "You'll find her. Don't you leave her alone, Jed. You have to marry her. Promise me." The words hit me like a physical blow. Marry, the notion was so foreign, so contrary to the life I had built that I could only stare at him. I was a man of the trail foreman of the Double Bar Ranch. My world was cattle horses and the vast, unforgiving sky. It was a world of hard work and simple truths, and there was no room in it for a wife for the softness and complications that came with marriage. "Silas, you know I've got no plans to marry," I said, my jaw tight with a mix of grief and resistance. "Not now, not ever, I know," he whispered, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "But she's got no one, Jed. And she's been through more than you can imagine. She's stronger than she looks." He was racked by a cough that sounded like tearing canvas, a wet, brutal sound that shook his entire frame. I pulled the heavy quilt higher over his chest, my hands clumsy. Outside, the cattle bellowed a low, mournful sound against the shriek of the wind. I could hear the other drovers shouting, their curses snatched away by the gale as they fought to keep the herd from scattering in the blizzard. Holding the line. That was my job. It was who I was. I kept my word like a lifeline because out here a man's word was all he truly had. And looking at Silas, I wasn't seeing the dying man shivering on the bedroll. I saw a lanky boy of 15 grinning at me from the bank of a raging spring river, having just hauled me from the current that nearly claimed my life. We had been just boys laughing to hide the terror shaking our limbs. A bond was forged that day, a debt I never thought I'd be asked to repay in such a way. Now in this frozen tent the bill had come due. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice low and rough. My resistance was crumbling under the weight of his gaze. "Eleanor Vance." Silas breathed, his eyes drifting shut for a moment, as if the name itself brought him a sliver of peace. "Nora, Kansas-born. Can sew a seam straighter than a rifle shot, even in a windstorm. Writes letters that tell the truth plain and simple. And she ain't afraid of work." His eyes opened again, locking onto mine with a desperate intensity. "I told her there was a home waiting for her at the end of this long road. I promised her that. Don't make me a liar, Jed. A name, a few scant details, and a promise from a dying man. It was a thin rope to tie my future to, but I could feel it tightening around me. It was that damned mountain pass," I said, my voice thick with regret. "You were hell-bent on getting the herd through before the thaw turned the trail to a river of mud. It was the right call for the cattle," he rasped. "The herd will make it. I just didn't outrun the storm." I reached for the small leather pouch that held his belongings, a nickel-plated watch that had stopped ticking, a whittled piece of wood that looked vaguely like a bird, a carefully folded letter, and a clean-pressed handkerchief embroidered with a single elegant S in blue thread. I ran my thumb over the stitching, the cloth impossibly soft in my calloused hands. It felt like it belonged to another world, a world of warmth and gentle things. With surprising care, my big hands wrapped it in a piece of brown paper from a soap bar and tied it with a spare leather thong. The silence in the tent stretched, broken only by the storm and Silas's labored breathing. The weight of his request, of the life he was asking me to take on, settled on my shoulders. It was a heavier burden than any saddle or supply pack I had ever carried. Finally, I broke the silence. The words felt like stones in my mouth. "I'll see her," I said. "I'll give her the handkerchief and tell her what happened. If she asks for my name beside hers in the church register, I'll write it there. If she needs a roof over her head, I'll see that it's a sturdy one. I will give her my protection and my respect." I paused, meeting his gaze directly. "This is my word, Silas." A wave of relief washed over his face, softening the sharp lines of pain. "That's enough, Jed. That's more than enough. She deserves a man who doesn't spook when the weather turns. A man who keeps his promises when no one is watching." "I don't spook," I replied, though a different kind of unease was coiling in my gut. It was the feeling a man gets when he sees a long, unfamiliar road stretching out before him, knowing he has to walk it, and knowing that everyone he knows will be watching his every step. The cook, a grizzled old man named Peterson, pushed the tent flap aside, his eyes red from the cold and campfire smoke. He took one look at Silas and his weathered face fell. He pulled off his fur-lined hat, holding it in his hands. "I'll fetch more hot water," was all he said. We worked in silence, bathing Silas's brow, trying to force a little warm broth between his lips, performing the last small mercies left to us. When Silas finally drifted into a fitful sleep, I sat on an ammo crate and watched the frost creep up the inside of the canvas, forming delicate, cruel patterns of ice. I was 34 years old. I had built a reputation for being tough but fair, a man whose word was his bond. And I had meticulously avoided the entanglement of marriage, seeing it as a cage for a man like me. The irony was as bitter as the wind. I had given my word to my friend in the heart of a blizzard, and now that word would bind me tighter than any rope. My gaze fell on the small paper-wrapped package by the lantern. I imagined a woman's hand, smaller and softer than mine, unfolding the paper and finding the handkerchief. That single blue S was all I knew of Eleanor Vance. And somehow it would have to be enough. Just before dawn, Silas stirred. His eyes were clear for a moment. The fever fog lifted. He looked at me and his lips formed a single silent word. "Thanks." "You pulled me from a river," I answered, my voice hoarse. "We're even." He managed a faint smile. "Nothing's ever even, Jed," he murmured, his gaze drifting to the lantern flame, which was beginning to pale against the first gray light of morning. Then his breathing softened, became shallower, and with one final gentle sigh it stopped. The storm raged on, but inside the little tent, everything had gone quiet and still. I pulled the blanket up over my friend's face and kept watch alone while the world outside turned from gray to a blinding, indifferent white. 2 weeks later, the stagecoach rattled into Frost River, its wheels crunching on the hard-packed snow of the main street. The sun was bright but offered no warmth, glinting off the icicles that hung like daggers from the eaves of the buildings. Word of my promise had traveled faster than I had, spreading through the small Montana town like a winter fever. A crowd had gathered in front of Henderson's Mercantile, their breaths pluming in the frigid air. I saw the blacksmith, his face still smudged with soot despite the cold. Mrs. Gable from the bakery, her apron dusted with flour, stood beside her husband. A few of my own ranch hands leaned against a hitching post, trying to look casual, but their sly grins gave them away. I knew what they were all thinking. They were expecting to see some poor, desperate creature, a thin, pale woman ready to cling to the first man who offered her a roof and a meal. I stood apart from them, my hat pulled low. The collar of my sheepskin coat turned up against the wind and the weight of their stares. The coach door creaked open and a portly salesman in a loud plaid coat stepped out, grumbling about the cold. He was followed by a weary-looking woman with 2 small children bundled in quilts. The crowd shuffled, their anticipation a palpable thing in the cold air. Then a gloved hand, neat and steady, appeared on the doorframe. It was followed by the hem of a dark wool traveling dress, the color of a deep forest green. The woman who stepped down onto the snowy street was nothing like the waif I or anyone else had imagined. She was tall, with a straightness to her back that spoke of a strength that had been tested and had held. Her chestnut hair was coiled in a neat bun beneath a modest, practical hat. And then there was her face. It was a face of stark intelligence, dominated by a pair of clear gray eyes that swept over the assembled crowd without a flicker of fear or shyness. A long, pale scar traced a path from her left cheekbone down towards her jaw. On another woman, it might have been a disfigurement. On her, it seemed only to sharpen her presence, a testament to a life that had not been easy. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. "That's gotta be her," someone whispered. "Looks like she could stare down a wolf," another muttered. Her gaze found me instantly, as if Silas had described me to her in his letters. She crossed the space between us, her boots making a determined crunch in the snow. "Mr. Stone," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the cold air. "I am Eleanor Vance." I touched the brim of my hat, my throat suddenly dry. "Miss Vance, I'm sorry for your loss." Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, searched my face looking for something I couldn't name. Then she spoke, her voice loud enough for the entire gawking crowd to hear. "Before this goes any further, Mr. Stone, I wish to be clear. If the promise you made to Silas was born of pity, I will not accept it. I did not travel 1,000 miles to become a man's charitable burden." The street went utterly still. Even the horses in their traces seemed to hold their breath. I studied her, taking in the determined set of her jaw and the proud lift of her chin. This was no meek little mouse come to beg for scraps. She was sizing me up, weighing my character just as surely as I was hers. "You speak your mind," I said, finally, the words coming out rougher than I intended. "I find it saves time," she replied without a hint of apology. Behind their hands, the townspeople whispered. A flicker of something I hadn't expected, respect, stirred within me. I had braced myself for a duty, for a weight to be carried. Instead, here stood a woman who looked ready to meet the world head-on, and me along with it. "If my sincerity is what you're questioning," I said, my voice even then, "perhaps we should discuss it somewhere with fewer ears." She gave a single sharp nod. "I agree." Without another word, she stood her ground, waiting for me to lead the way. Her composure under the intense scrutiny of the entire town was remarkable. I turned towards Henderson's Mercantile, feeling their eyes on my back. As I held the heavy wooden door open for her, one clear thought cut through my own surprise and the town's gossip. I was genuinely curious to hear what this woman had to say. The back room of Henderson's store smelled of coffee beans, cured leather, and wood smoke. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of pale winter light slanting down from a high, grimy window. I closed the door, shutting out the murmurs from the street, and the silence felt heavy between us. Eleanor remained standing, her gloved hands clasped in front of her. She watched me with those unnervingly steady gray eyes. "You wanted privacy, Mr. Stone," she said. "You have it." I took off my hat and tossed it onto a nearby barrel of nails. "I came here to honor a promise to a dying friend, Miss Vance. That's the plain truth of it. And I appreciate the sentiment behind that promise," she replied, her tone crisp and businesslike. "But Silas and I had an arrangement. It was to be a partnership built on mutual respect and practical need. He needed a wife to make a home, and I needed a new start. There was no talk of romance. If you intend to honor his promise, then I expect you to honor the terms of it. I will not be an object of your pity." I leaned against a stack of crates, crossing my arms over my chest. The woman was flint. "You think I mean to pity you? I don't know your intentions," she said, her voice unwavering. "That is why I am asking. If you are looking for a quiet, decorative wife to sit by your fire and nod at your opinions, you should put me on the next stagecoach east. I will not be that woman for you or for any man." A reluctant smile tugged at my lips. I couldn't help but admire her bluntness. "And what kind of woman would you be?" "A partner," she said without a moment's hesitation. "I am a skilled seamstress. I can keep books. I can manage a household. I will contribute my share and more. But I will maintain my own mind and a measure of my own independence. I will not be owned." There was no anger in her voice, only a deep, unshakable conviction. I found myself looking at the scar on her cheek, and for the first time I wondered about the story behind it. "You talk like a woman who's been through a fire," I said quietly. A shadow flickered in her eyes, a momentary darkness that was gone as quickly as it came. "I have," she said. "In Kansas, I owned my own dressmaking shop. It was a small place, but it was mine. I built it from nothing. One night, a drunkard stumbled out of the saloon next door and knocked over a lantern. The fire, it took everything in minutes." She instinctively touched her cheek. "I got out. The shop did not. After that, there was nothing left for me there. So when Silas wrote to me of a new life in Montana, of a partnership, I accepted." I held her gaze, not looking away from the scar as she told her story. There was no plea for sympathy in her words, just a statement of fact. She had lost everything and had simply found the will to start again. "If we marry," I said, thinking aloud, "you'll have a home at the ranch. You'll be safe. I'll see to it." "And in return," she pressed. "In return," I said, meeting her challenge, "I will not ask for anything you are not willing to give. You will have food, a roof, and my protection. I will give you the same respect I'd give any hand who rides for my brand. Your business will be your own. Your earnings will be your own. The answer seemed to surprise her. A flicker of something, perhaps relief, softened her features for an instant. She inclined her head. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Stone. A practical marriage. Respect, support, and nothing more. I straightened up and retrieved my hat. We'll see Reverend Miller in the morning. Best get it done before the town invents any more stories. A rare, faint smile touched her lips. They do seem to be enjoying the spectacle. I opened the door and stepped aside. As she walked past me and out into the cold, bright afternoon, a thought struck me. My promise to Silas suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a mystery I was just beginning to unravel. This woman was far more than I had bargained for, and for the first time since that terrible day in the tent, I felt a stirring of something other than grief and duty. It felt a lot like curiosity. Our wedding was as stark and unadorned as the winter landscape. It took place the next day in the small clapboard church, the air inside so cold we could see our breath. Reverend Miller presided, his words simple and direct. The only attendees were Mr. Henderson from the store and two of my most trusted ranch hands who stood awkwardly in the back, twisting their hats in their hands. Nora wore the same dark green dress she'd arrived in. It was a statement of practicality and dignity. I stood beside her in a clean shirt and my least worn vest. When the Reverend asked if we promised to honor and keep one another in mutual respect, we both answered with steady, clear voices. There was no exchange of rings, no sentimental flourish. We sealed our vows with a firm handshake and signed our names in the town register. Jedediah Stone and Eleanor Vance. It looked strange on the page, two names bound together by a promise made to a dead man. We took a room at the town's only boarding house. Mrs. Kowalski, a stout woman with a kind heart, greeted us with a knowing wink and gave us the key to her best room. I can sleep in the chair, I offered, setting my saddlebags by the door. The room was dominated by a large iron frame bed. Nora shook her head, already unpinning her hat. That's foolish. You'd freeze and be no good to anyone. I will take the bed. You can make a pallet on the floor. I imagine we've both slept in worse conditions. Fair enough, I agreed, relieved by her practicality. As I unrolled my blankets, she broke the silence. Mr. Stone, she began, does this town have a need for a seamstress? I looked up, surprised. You're planning to work already. I am at my best when I have a purpose, she said simply. And I prefer to earn my own way. That was how less than a week after our wedding, Nora found a small, unused storeroom attached to Henderson's mercantile. The rent was steep, but she was determined. When she told me about it, I just nodded. What I didn't tell her was that I paid a visit to Henderson myself that evening, quietly settling half the rent for the next 6 months with the strict understanding that she was never to know. She's a proud woman, I told him. Let her think she's earning it all. It'll mean more that way. Henderson, a man who understood the nuances of small-town life, simply nodded. You got a good one, Jed, a strong one. Over the next few weeks, I watched as she transformed that dusty room. She scrubbed it clean, set up a long work table, and hung the tools of her trade, scissors, needles, spools of thread, in neat, orderly rows. She started by mending torn shirts and patching trousers for ranch hands, her stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. Soon the women of the town started coming to her, asking for new dresses for alterations. Her reputation for quality work grew quickly. She did more than just sew. I learned from Henderson that she had started teaching a few of the local girls to sew in the afternoons. She tells them it's so they never have to depend on a man for every coin, he told me, a grin on his face. She began quietly mending the clothes of the poorest children in town, leaving the repaired garments on their families' doorsteps before dawn. She never spoke of it, and I never asked, but I knew. Her strength wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet, steady force. I saw it one evening when a half-drunk rancher named Bert Higgins stumbled into her shop. I was across the street waiting to walk her back to the boarding house. He tossed a torn vest on her counter. Fix this, he slurred. I'll pay you when I get paid. My terms are payment first, Mr. Higgins, I heard her say, her voice calm but firm. He leaned in close, a leering grin on his face. Don't be difficult, little lady. It's just a small tear. Then it should only cost you a small amount, she replied, not moving an inch. Which you can pay now or you can take your vest elsewhere. Higgins, clearly not used to being challenged, flushed red. He muttered a curse, snatched the vest, and stormed out. The story was all over town by morning. Nora had stood her ground, and in a town where a woman's business could be easily dismissed, she had earned a new level of respect. That night, as we walked through the snowy streets, the crunch of our boots, the only sound, I found myself looking at her in a new light. You handled Higgins well, I said. She glanced at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing, I insisted. You didn't bend. As we reached the steps of the boarding house, a thought struck me with the force of a physical blow. The respect I felt for her, this woman I had married out of duty, was slowly, quietly turning into something else. Something deeper and more complicated, something that I hadn't prepared for at all. The winter tightened its grip on Frost River, burying the town in feet of snow. The ranch was mostly shut down, the cattle huddled in the valleys, and I found myself spending more time in town. I started seeking Nora's opinion on things, not just pleasantries, but real business. I brought the ranch ledgers to the boarding house one evening, spreading them out on the small table in our room. I need another eye on these figures, I said, feeling oddly nervous. She sat down, pulling the lamp closer. For hours, she studied the pages, her finger tracing the columns of numbers. You're losing money on your supply runs, she said, finally tapping a page. You buy in small quantities from Henderson. If you were to pool your order with 2 or 3 of the smaller ranches, you could buy in bulk directly from the train depot in Bozeman. You'd cut your costs by 1/3. I stared at her. It was so simple, so logical, yet it had never occurred to me. And this pasture here, she continued, pointing to a section of the map I'd brought. The North 40. It's poor for grazing, you've noted. Rockiest land on the whole spread, I confirmed. It might not be good for cattle, she said, her gray eyes alight with an idea. But it could be perfect for growing flax. Flax, I was bewildered. Flax becomes linen, she explained patiently. Good linen cloth is expensive and hard to come by out here. We could grow it, and I could teach some of the women to spin and weave it. We could create a whole new industry for this town right here on your land. I leaned back in my chair, looking at her, not as the woman I had promised to protect, but as a partner whose vision and intelligence far surpassed my own in matters like these. The idea was brilliant. It was daring, and it was all hers. Our relationship began to change after that. We talked for hours, not just about the ranch, but about our pasts, about our hopes for the future. I told her about Silas, about the boy who pulled me from the river. She told me more about her life in Kansas, about the pride she felt in her small shop and the crushing despair of watching it burn. One evening, as we walked back from her shop, the street was dark and quiet. A figure stumbled out of the saloon, blocking our path. It was one of the newer ranch hands, a man I knew to be mean when he was drunk. Well now, Mrs. Mallister, he slurred, stepping in front of Nora. A fine-looking woman like you shouldn't be out in the cold. Before Nora could even reply, I stepped between them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Go home, Tom, I said, my voice low and cold as the winter air. Now. He tried to grin, but it faltered under my gaze. Just being friendly, boss. I said, go home. He muttered something under his breath and shuffled away. I turned to Nora. Are you all right? She nodded, though her breath was a little shaky. Thank you, Jedediah. We walked the rest of the way in silence. At the steps of the boarding house, under the pale glow of a lantern, she stopped and looked at me. You handled that so quietly, she said. Most men would have made a show of it, thrown a punch. Most men want to prove they can win a fight, I said. I was only interested in making sure the trouble stopped. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes and made something in my chest ache. You are a careful man, Jedediah Stone. Careful keeps the people I care about safe, I replied, the words coming out before I had a chance to think about them. Good night, Nora. That night, lying on my pallet on the floor, the room filled with the quiet sound of her breathing, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I was falling in love with my wife. The promise I had made to Silas felt like a lifetime ago. It had been the key that opened a door, but the woman on the other side of it was someone I now wanted for reasons that were entirely my own. The fear and unease I once felt about marriage had been replaced by a new, more terrifying fear. The fear of what my life would be like without her in it. The final blizzard of the season hit us in March. A furious parting shot from a long, hard winter. I had been in town all day, finalizing the purchase of the land north of my property, the land Nora had a vision for. As I walked down the main street, my head bent against the driving snow, I saw a light in her shop window. I stopped. Through the glass frosted at the edges, I saw her. She was kneeling on the floor beside a small boy, the son of a widowed ranch hand. His coat was thin and patched, and he was shivering. Nora was showing him how to mend a tear in his own worn mitt in her hands, guiding his small, clumsy ones with infinite patience. Her face, illuminated by the warm lamplight, was the gentlest I had ever seen it. In that moment, watching her perform that small, quiet act of kindness, something inside me broke open. The last of my reserve, the last wall I had built around my heart, crumbled to dust. This wasn't about respect or admiration anymore. It was love, plain and simple. A love as fierce and real as the storm raging outside. I pushed the door open, a small bell jingling overhead. She looked up startled. "Jedediah," she said, a smile warming her face. "You're out in this gale." "I had business at the bank," I said, stomping the snow from my boots. "About the Morrison land." I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. "But that's not why I'm here." I walked closer, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Nora," I began, my voice low and raw. This arrangement between us. It can't be about the promise anymore. For me, it hasn't been for a long time." She searched my eyes, her own wide and questioning in the lamplight. "When I made that promise to Silas," I continued, the words tumbling out. "I thought I was taking on a burden. A duty. I was wrong. Somewhere between that first day on this street and this very moment, you stopped being a promise I had to keep and became the only person I want to come home to. You've built a life here in this town, in my life, and I can't imagine it without you. I love you, Nora. Not because Silas asked me to, but because I do." The shop was silent, save for the hiss of the snow against the window panes. Her eyes glistened, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek, crossing the pale line of her scar. "You have the most inconvenient timing, Jedediah Stone," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been in love with you for months, but I told myself to honor our agreement. I told myself to be content with your respect." A slow smile spread across my face. "I seem to recall the agreement was respect, support, and nothing more than we wish to give." I took another step, closing the space between us. "I'm wishing for a great deal more. So am I." She laughed, a sound like water flowing after a long freeze. I reached for her, and she came into my arms as if she had always belonged there. Our first kiss was not the tentative exploration of strangers, but the deep, certain kiss of two people who had found their way home. It was warm and real, and it melted away all the cold and duty that had stood between us. When we finally parted, she rested her forehead against mine. So she whispered, "Did you buy the land?" "We did," I said, my voice filled with a joy so profound it almost hurt. "And we'll build something good on it. Together." We left the shop hand in hand, stepping out into the swirling snow. The world was white and wild around us, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing the storm alone. That night, for the first time, I didn't sleep on a pallet on the floor. Long after Nora was asleep, her head resting on my shoulder, I got up and walked to the small chest where I kept my things. I took out the paper-wrapped package I had carried from Wyoming. Unfolding the paper, I looked at the handkerchief, the blue S, still neat and proud. It was a relic from another life, a symbol of a promise kept. Quietly, I placed it on the nightstand beside her, where she would see it when she woke. It wasn't a reminder of a debt, but a tribute to the friend who, in his final act, had given me the greatest gift of my life. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the land. But inside our small room, we were warm and safe. Two people bound not by a promise, but by a love, as strong and enduring as the mountains themselves. In this story, the important lesson lies not only in the harsh winter storms or the final words spoken at the edge of life, but in the way a man keeps his promise and discovers meaning through sacrifice. Jedediah reluctantly accepted a vow, yet that very promise opened a new life for him. A home, a steadfast partner, and a community made stronger by quiet devotion. The message is clear. Sometimes we do not choose our path by personal desire, but by responsibility and loyalty. And if we walk that path with sincerity, we may find the greatest rewards: peace, love, and respect. For older audiences, this serves as a reminder that the worth of a life is not measured only by material success, but by how faithfully we keep our word, how we care for others, and the legacy of trust we leave behind. In the end, what remains is the fulfillment of a promise and the love we have sown. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.